Welcome to the SSPX podcast, delivering sermons, lectures, and the spoken word from across the English-speaking world. On this episode of Questions with Father, we'll be talking with Father Paul Robinson about music. Why is it that the Catholic Church discourages its faithful from listening to rock music? Why are certain types of music okay or not okay to listen to? We'll dive into that question, as well as the Sunday obligation. Is it okay to miss Mass while you're traveling? What about taking a job that may require you to miss Mass more often than not on Sundays? Should you take that job for the good of your family, or is going to Mass every Sunday more important? We'll go into these questions in a lot more detail coming up. As always, if you have questions that you would like Father to answer on a future episode, please feel free to submit them at sspx.news or send it in to our Facebook page, particularly if you have questions about the coming season of Advent. We'll be recording with Father here in the next week or so about the Advent season. If there's something that you've always wanted to know, go ahead and submit your questions online. And as always, the SSPX podcast is free and will be free to listen to, but it does take a great amount of resources. We would be very appreciative if you were able to set up a monthly recurring donation. Just go to sspxpodcast.com. $20, $10, $5 a month would greatly help us with the resources that are needed to make this podcast possible. If you aren't able to donate, that's fine. Please feel free, though, to leave a rating or a review on the SSPX podcast, especially if you're listening on iTunes or Apple Podcasts. It will help more people to see the beauty and the truth of traditional Catholicism. With that said, let's turn to Father Robinson on the SSPX podcast. Well, we are back with Questions with Father, joined, like usual, by Father Paul Robinson. Hello, Father. How are you?
Hello, Andrew. It's good to be back on the show.
I guess we'll just hop right back into the questions if that's all right with you, Father.
Let's do it.
All right. Well, one that we held over from last time that we just didn't have time to get to on episode 21, but this was saved. A listener asks about the Sunday obligation, about attending Mass on Sunday. At what point are outside or secular duties important enough, quote unquote, he said, to miss the Sunday obligation? What about jury duty or work? If my work mandates that I work each Sunday, am I obliged to find another job or even quit without another job? And he follows up with, and I guess I'll do this with a follow-up question too, Father, but a priest once told me that traveling even for a family vacation was a good enough excuse to miss Mass. Is that correct? So a few questions here about the Sunday obligation. When is it permissible to miss Mass?
As with many of these questions of moral theology, there is a certain foundational principles that we have to follow. Of course, we all know that the third commandment obliges us to attend Mass on Sundays. This is the day of the Lord. And really, it is, in the big picture of things, it's not a lot of time if you consider how much time we have in the whole week. Yet at the same time, moral theologians, they recognize that there do arise situations when we may not be able to assist at Mass. And they distinguish between different types of obstacles that may be preventing us from getting to Mass. One would be a physical impossibility. And that's just when the state of your health or of your body, or just the state of your ability to obtain transportation makes it impossible for you to get to Mass. If you're laid up in a hospital, and then obviously you're not going to be able to get into a car and travel to Mass. Or if your car is broken down, you just can't get to Mass. That's a physical impossibility. You can't be physically present because you just can't get yourself there.
Okay.
The other type of impossibility is a moral impossibility. It's not the obstacles is on the part of transportation or your body or whatever. It's just there's certain circumstances that make it very difficult for you to get to Mass. And the primary example of that, I think, would be that you have a job and your employer expects you to be there for work. And if you don't show up for work on a Sunday, you may well get fired. So in that, I think really what the questioner is asking is about that moral impossibility. What really qualifies for a moral impossibility to get to Mass? I think it's a prudential question, and there's a certain balance to be observed. And the balance is between taking care of our body and taking care of our soul. So if the situation is such that you really won't be able to take care of your body, you won't survive, you won't be able to have enough money in order to raise your family or what have you. It's just impossible for you to get another job. you've got to keep this job or else you won't have income coming in, then clearly that's a sufficiently grave reason to miss the Mass on Sunday. At the same time, we have to recognize that this is not a good thing for your soul, and you should be looking for other possibilities. One thing that I suggest to some people when they tell me that I wasn't able to make it to Mass on Sunday, I say, well, is it possible for you to go to Mass during the week sometime? Do you have the availability of daily Mass? And perhaps you can make up for that Sunday Mass. It's not ideal, but it is one way of still nourishing your soul, even though you weren't able to get to the Mass on the Sunday.
Now, it seems to me that it's situational, where if someone is faced with this decision to make, they could, ask one of the priests about, the specific needs. And I'm making a lot of assumptions here, Father, but I assume if it's an occasional thing where boss calls you in and you got to work on a Sunday, and it's not a regular thing, that's not that big of a deal. You should still try to, make it up or keep the day holy as best you can. But Father, what would you do if I came to you, for instance, and I was embarking on a job as an airline pilot, and I was told that for the next 5 years, I got to pay my dues and I'm going to be flying every Sunday. Would you advise me to find another airline to work for or find another job? Is that something that would be grave enough where, you need to do what you can do to get to Mass and not accept this job? Or would you say, go ahead and do the job, but fulfill your obligation in another way?
Yeah, I think that's a good example of one of these questions where it's not an either or, but there's a certain trade-off. If I understand your scenario correctly, is perhaps the person, perhaps you already have a job, but you've got a better offer, this lucrative position with an airline where you'll be perhaps flying overseas, I don't know, and you're saying to yourself, well, I could make more money, I could support my family in a more lucrative way, and this would enable me, for instance, to put my kids through college,
Right.
Something like that. Should I take this job opportunity because there's going to be so many benefits accruing to my family? And in such a case, it's a prudential decision. And I would tend to say that look, you really need to look firstly at the spiritual concerns of your family. I mean, if your family is surviving on your current wage, and there is food on the table, and you're not out on the street or anything like that, it may be a little difficult, and it often is, unfortunately, difficult for our big families today to make ends meet.
Sure.
But you are getting by. I think, if we consider that you're going to be away from home a lot, and you're not going to be able to get the Mass on Sunday, you're going to be away from your wife and your children, there's a lot of dangers there. I would say, well, you might very well consider this may not be spiritually advantageous, or the spiritual loss will not be compensated by the financial gain. So it is really one of those situations where you weigh the trade-off, the respective trade-off, the financial gain versus the spiritual loss. And I would tend to say in that case, it's a very difficult decision to make, obviously, but in that case, I would say probably, he should consider passing up the job and just remaining with what he has.
Okay. And so when you say a prudential decision, Father, that basically translates to, after careful thought and prayer and, perhaps speaking with a pastor or maybe even without speaking to a pastor, if all the options are considered and you make the decision, then that's the correct course of action to take. Generally,
that terminology, one thing that it can indicate is that this is not a black and white situation. It's not a situation to where you're directly going against the faith. There has to be a careful weighing of the different perspectives, different possibilities that are available. And in that case, I do think it is good to consult a priest and just to bounce the ideas off the priest. And the priest wouldn't say, this is what you have to do. But the priest would be able to have a discussion like what we're having right now and say, well, have you considered all these things?
Right.
It's just so good to get a more supernatural perspective on these questions. Have you really thought about what it's going to be like when you're going to be away from your wife and children? You're going to be working these long hours. You're not going to have ready access to the Mass and the sacraments. Can we reasonably expect that you're going to be able to be the husband and father that God wants of you in order to lead your family to heaven? in that situation. And then he's like, okay, well, yeah, I really need to reflect upon this a bit more.
On the flip side, Father, would you say that it would be almost reckless if someone were to say, even with the most pious of motives, if someone were to say, I'm not able to make Mass as often as I would like to, so I'm just going to quit my job and move my family close to St. Isidore's in Denver so I can go to Mass every Sunday and do that without any options or any job opportunities and say, the Lord will provide. Would that be a bit of presumption? Obviously, it's an extreme situation or an extreme example, but wouldn't that be a bit of a presumption to do that?
Absolutely. I mean, just to say, for instance, that, well, this is the right thing before God, and how nice it would be to be next to a priory, so we're just going to get up and move without really looking in advance to see if it's viable. I mean, to be honest, Andrew, one of the things that I've been told since I've come here to Colorado is that Colorado is becoming a little California, and the real estate prices are just going through the roof.
Right.
So the cost of living is really high here. So there's a fair number of people who have wanted to move here, but when they start investigating the real estate prices, they're just saying, wow, there's just no way I'm going to be able to have the same standard of living in the Denver area that I have in other places where they're moving from, so that's something that has to be investigated before you move to another place. Can we survive in that place? And I think you've got a lot of local economies in the states, so the cost of living varies very, very greatly from state to state. So it's something that has to be investigated.
All right, that's good advice, Father. Thank you. The second part of his question was about traveling, a family vacation. Is that a good enough excuse to miss Mass?
Well, I think it is good. It's good for people to try to plan their vacation in such a way that they're able to get to Mass on Sundays. We have so many resources today, such as the international website, the Mass Locator website, where you can find the Mass of the Society pretty much around the world. So it is good to do that, but at the same time, you can envision situations when that's not going to be possible. For instance, if a family has a log cabin in the north of Maine, and that's just their vacation spot, and it's wonderful. They have a great time with their family and so on. But the closest society Mass is 3 hours away. So in that case, there's no obligation for them to just say we're not going to vacation there, or we're just going to vacation there in the middle of the week. It's just that they still have to try to sanctify the Sunday and to spend at least an hour. I would say at least an hour on the Sunday doing spiritual works. I think a lot of Jewish Catholics are familiar with that, especially the ones at the mission chapels where they only have Mass twice a month or once a month. Technically, the rule is that you're not obliged to go to Mass if you're required to travel an hour or more. At the same time, I would definitely caution people with taking that rule sort of by the letter, because we really have to be careful about the message that we give, that the parents give to the children on the efforts they make to get to Mass. I mean, if really driving an hour is not a huge deal, and priests do a lot of driving, and they know it's not
Right.
really a huge deal. And if you don't make any sacrifices to make the Mass, you're just taking a vacation. You're just out there in Maine for a month, and you're not making any effort to get to Mass. The children just get the impression that it's really not that important.
Right. One of my relatives always said, I think she was a couple hours away from Mass, or an hour and a half away from the closest Latin Mass, and she said, well, we just made a little day trip out of it every single Sunday, and that was what we did every Sunday. And we'd stop and have some McDonald's or something on the way, or on the way back, and make it a good experience, and that's your day.
There's so many edifying stories of families who do that. I know a family in Australia. They're out in the outback, and they travel 6 hours one way once a month to get to Mass, and they rent a hotel, and so it's just, there's a lot of edifying stories like that out there of a family making big sacrifices. And as I say, this really has a big impact on the children. They see that Mass really is very, very important for our lives.
Absolutely. Well, moving on to our second question for the week, Father. This one was a very simple, about 8 words long. Why are we not allowed to listen to certain types of music? And I'll just leave it there, and I guess we can start chatting.
Yeah, this is a fascinating question and a very interesting topic about what we're allowed to listen or not listen, or why we're not allowed to listen to certain things. The general rule is that we're not allowed to put ourselves in an occasion of sin. And in this specific context, an occasion of sin would be just something that's really going to turn our soul upside down, in the sense of it's going to get our emotions moving at such a violent pace that it's going to be hard for us to think rationally and to make good choices. If we put ourselves in any situation where our emotions, we know our emotions are just going to take over our soul, and we're not going to be able to reflect rationally, then we're putting ourselves in a very dangerous spiritual state. So this can happen with respect to our eyes. Obviously, it can happen with respect to our ears. So, if with our eyes, if you watch a movie and it contains nudity in it, then that's going to violently excite your passions, the passions of lust in your soul. And when that passion becomes excited, it's hard to think. It's difficult to reflect, and the will is just going to be drawn to the commission of impure activity. And as I say, this is why we tell people you don't watch bad movies. You're just going to be very strongly drawn to impure activity. And so the same thing goes with listening. It's not always as powerful as the sense of sight. Sense of hearing doesn't have as powerful an effect, but it does have a very real effect on us. So just as when we see things, we have this automatic reaction that's produced in us by the fact that we see it. So too, by the fact that we're hearing something, it's going to produce an automatic effect just by the fact that we're human beings and these sounds are coming in. So what is that reaction going to be? We can anticipate what that reaction is going to be based on the nature of the music. Music has a certain content, it has a certain language, and there are types of music that do not turn our soul upside down, but rather elevate us. They uplift us. Obviously with Gregorian chant, when we go to Mass and we hear like Kyrie 11, it's not something that's going to make us want to be lustful, but rather it elevates us. It just automatically, when we hear that, we're placed in a mood to worship God. It's definitely not overwhelming our emotions. The reason for that is that the Gregorian chant is just pure melody. Melody is something that speaks to our intellect. It speaks more to our higher faculties, and so there's no chance that our lower faculties are going to be disturbed when we hear the Gregorian chant.
I know this is a hot topic, especially for young adults and parents, families. I think the last thing that a 16 or a 19-year-old would want to hear is the only music you can listen to is Gregorian chant. By holding out Gregorian chant as the example, Father, that's not necessarily what you're saying, right? There are other forms of music that are perfectly fine or uplifting. It's not just chant that we need to listen to the entire time, right?
No, please don't.
Okay.
Just listen to Gregorian chant in your home. So Gregorian chant is really specifically tailored for worship. So, in other words, there is a context, a special context for Gregorian chant, and that is the liturgy. There are other types of music that are more designed for entertainment, that they do appeal to the emotions to some degree, but they do not put the emotions or the emotional aspect of the music above that intellective aspect. So the primary aspect of the music is the melody. That's like the storyline of the music. There's also harmony where you try to blend different melodic passages. You try to blend them together to make a whole texture of sound, and that will appeal not just to the intellect, but will often appeal to the heart as well. Polyphony is an example, but that's on the side of sacred liturgy. But a lot of popular songs, folk songs, can be made polyphonic, or you can do like the Star Spangled Banner in a polyphonic way. where you have an upper line or in a lower line, or you have different voices that are all singing together, different melodic lines, and that music is another option besides Gregorian chant. Or if you have any music wherein the melody is still supreme, and that, as I say, that can be classical music, it can be folk music, it can be popular music that has that essential hierarchical ordination of the music, where the higher elements of the music predominate, and the lower element, which is rhythm, is not put uppermost. That's really the golden rule for what makes for ordered music, that the rhythm, which is the lowest element, is not the primary element of the music, but it's subordinate to the rhythm and subordinate to the melody and the harmony of the music. That's the golden rule. I don't care what you're listening to, as long as that's in place.
Okay, so that's kind of your standard for parents, for instance, to what kind of music to allow in the house for their children to listen to. And again, I say children, it applies to all of us, but forming that musical taste early on is important. I mean, how many people do you hear? Well, my dad listened to such, and that's what I love now. So that would be the advice you would give a parent. Make sure that it's the music or the artist or the band or whatever is not. It's not overly reliant on rhythm. That's not the predominant thing. But instead, what is there is the melody and the beauty of the music itself.
Yes, and I mean, ideally, we would be able to play a few examples of this, and the parents could get the idea. And as you indicate, I think it's very important that the parents make an effort to put music in their children's lives, because if there's just a vacuum, if they just grow up and the parents are just like, oh, I'm not into music, I really don't do music, and there's never any music playing in the house, or they don't sort of make their children familiar with any type of music, or make their children love a certain pieces of music, then the children will be left to their own, and chances are they will gravitate towards rock and roll, or just the popular music that everybody else is listening to. They're going to have to fill that void, because we as human beings, we sort of need music. It's
right.
Music is part of what we are. What God has made us to have an affinity towards song.
I would love to be able to play some clips, but copyright law and all that. Sorry, Father.
Yeah. But yeah, it reminds me of a song by Weird Al where he tells you not to break international copyright law by pirating songs. He has a spoof of a song, yeah, about that. Great. Yeah, it's called "Don't Download This Song." But anyway,
well, one of my friends who is heavily involved in music told me something, and I hadn't heard it before, and I think about it all the time. He said, "Music is the only art form that will exist in heaven," and that's really a beautiful thought.
It is indeed. Yeah. It is indeed.
So we talked about how rhythm is kind of that guiding principle for parents. Rock music. What is it about rock music that is damaging to listen to? I know that there's I did it myself. My parents would tell me about, well, you can't listen to rock music, and I went, you guys must be old. You just don't like anything that's new. But there is a principle there that's I guess a danger to the soul, right?
Yes, and I think this is the problem, is that rock music does break that golden rule, wherein that lower element of the music, which is the rhythm, is put uppermost in rock music by definition. So rhythm is the beat of the music. It's that steady, relentless sound that comes at a certain chronological rate, and it's. In rock music, it's the main thing that you hear. And as I say, when that beat is lower in the musical sort of composition, when it's not playing the primary role, and when it's serving the melody and the harmony, there's no problem at all. But when it is placed as the primary element, when it's isolated, and it tends to stimulate the emotions very strongly. Just as watching a bad movie stimulates emotions very strongly, so too listening to a piece of music where where you have this relentless beat is the primary thing that you hear, it automatically creates a certain disorder in the soul, wherein you're moved to the emotions, often of anger or lust, depending on what rock composition you're listening to. There's because of the intensity of the rhythm and the violence of the music. Ultimately, rock music has its origin in the tribal dances, where these tribes would get together and they would beat their drums at this rate, and they would be moving according to the beat of the drums, and they would just sort of go out of themselves. I mean, the music would cause them to, in a sense, temporarily lose their minds in this frenzy. So working themselves up in these pagan rituals. And, obviously it's not happening with people turning on the radio listening to rock music. I'm not saying that that's happening, but I'm saying that this is the kind of effect that a purely rhythmic music can have on people. And when you put the rhythm as the primary element of the music, it is going to create that disorder in the soul where the rational faculty is going to be attenuated, and the emotions are going to be very strongly stirred, and not the right emotions. The emotions of anger and lust is quite typical is what's going to happen.
So it's almost like that war dance. I mean, it's a war dance for a reason. It's supposed to inflame you, get you excited, get you angry, and that's what you're saying. That's kind of the basis of that rock music.
Yes, and that's why they had the music there. They wanted that effect. The tribes, these pagan rituals, they wanted to induce in themselves this state of frenzy, and they needed the drums. They needed that rhythm. In order to produce that effect in them. Whereas we as Catholics, we're saying to ourselves, I don't want to lose my rational power. I don't want to reduce it and subordinate it to my emotions. And that's why I'm not going to listen to this music. I'm going to put myself in an occasion of sin. If I do that, my rational faculty is going to be working properly. I'm going to have these emotions of lust and anger, and who knows what I'm going to do or what I'm going to be wanting to do in that state.
Rhythm in and of itself, is that always bad? I'm thinking in particular of, like Spanish guitar music has a very strong rhythm all the time. Would that fall into the same category in your mind? So,
yeah, as I say, perhaps you're thinking of like the flamenco type dancing or whatever. I think in that music there is a melodic component that is more primary, and it's not just relentless rhythm. There is a strong rhythm, but it's not as such. I mean, surely it's heading in that direction. And it's a very passionate music, but at the same time, it's much more controlled than the rock music, which is sort of in your face. We want to stir up your passions without keeping them under control.
And I guess like with all things being traditional Catholic, you want to seek out what is good and what is uplifting, and not try to find this, well, here's the limit where I can listen to, and okay, right here, and and go right up to the limit. I think we should try to seek out what is good, uplifting, and powerful for our souls, not for our passions.
That's exactly right. I mean, this is the spiritual prudence that we're talking about. We don't want to put ourselves in a situation where we know that our emotions are going to be going wild by definition, and therefore, we're putting ourselves in spiritual danger. So just as this can happen through the eyes, because they're the windows of our soul, so too the ears. They're in a certain sense also windows of our soul. And if the things that are coming into our ears we know are just going to turn our soul upside down, then up front we should say, no, I'm not going to put myself in that situation. It's just highly imprudent.
Absolutely. Well, two topics this week that were very prudential questions, and again, there is gray area in this. This isn't black and white. Whether traveling is okay, and whether having a job on Sunday or this type of music or that type of music. But again, thank you for laying out the principles, at least that we have as a kind of a north star that we can follow, Father. Thank you. My pleasure, Andrew. All right, we'll talk with you soon. Thank you for listening to this edition of the SSPX podcast. Next time, we'll be talking about Advent. So if you have questions about the Advent season, or something that you've always wanted to know a little bit more in detail about, feel free to submit your questions at sspx.podcast.com. We'll be answering those questions on the next episode. And if you were able to leave a review or a rating on our podcast, it will help us out immensely. Just go to SSPX Podcast in whatever podcast app or program you're listening to, leave a rating and a review, and it will help more people to see the beauty and the truth of traditional Catholicism. Until next time, thank you for listening, and God bless you.